The 8 and 6 is a powerful design for resolving conflict between two people while at the same time building a more positive and constructive relationship between them. It works because it engages the participants in a highly structured process that ensures equal risk. There are a couple of assumptions that need to be satisfied before choosing this design. First, the two conflicting parties need to be committed to resolving the conflict. This could be because they believe their current situation must change, or because they've been told to fix it or else. Second, the third-party facilitator, you, is trusted by both individuals to at least be a fair referee in the process. Step 1. The setup. Schedule at least a half day for this design in a neutral off-site location. If an off-site location isn't possible, make sure to choose a soundproof office location that doesn't indicate a preference for one individual over the other or doesn't have windows through which people can be seen. Some people want instant resolution and see a half day spent with people in conflict as rather onerous. If this happens, you might want to point out to them the cost to the team or organisation in terms of productivity and morale if the conflict were to continue, and how their conflict bleeds into other relationships and functions. You'll need to prepare a notebook and pen for each of the two people, some large sheets of flip chart paper, 2 easels, markers, and masking tape. Set up the room with the easels facing away from each other. This is just to give the two people some privacy for writing. Step 2. The information gathering. Initially tell the two people that they will be each stationed at their own easel containing flip chart paper. When they get to their easels, ask them to split the top sheet into 3 equal parts by drawing 2 vertical lines on the page. Then ask them to label the left and right-hand columns like this. Explain that the left column should contain their own 8 greatest behavioural strengths as a person, leader, or team member. The right column should contain what they believe the other person will say are their 8 greatest strengths. The rule is that each person must write 8 items in each column and be able to provide a behavioural example of each strength. This means an example of something they do that demonstrates the strength which other people can observe. The assumption is that even enemies or those in conflict have many strengths, or they wouldn't be working in the organisation. Here's a really top tip. Set the tone of the meeting by saying something like, "We will not be talking about history." This will ensure that you avoid getting into a he said, she said, blaming discussion that would further polarise the combatants and be nearly impossible to facilitate. Once they finish this task, ask them to now write in their notebooks the 8 greatest strengths of the other person. It's really important to make sure the participants each write 8 things, even if they seem incapable of listing this many. Much of the time, the underlying reason for any resistance is that the conflict they are trying to resolve has them stuck in the other person being wrong, and they cannot think of anything good to say about them. Forcing them to list all 8 provides a means of beginning to break down these entrenched feelings, without which the conflict will never be resolved. If you work with somebody, you should be able to find at least 8 good things to say about them, even if some ideas are a bit lame. As the facilitator, you can also encourage the participant to think of the other person outside of work, such as saying they're a great parent, but the key is that they must believe this is true. Step 3. The strength sharing. Ask the two people to fold over their sheets like this, then bring their easels to the middle of the room. These folds cover the text on each end of the sheets and leave the blank centre column visible. Now ask for a volunteer to go first. If nobody volunteers, you'll have to choose one. Here's another really top tip. If one of the people is the boss, have the subordinate first give their boss the feedback on their strengths. When focusing on areas of development, have the boss give their areas of development feedback first. We're assuming that it's easier to receive feedback from the boss than to give it to them. Ask the person going first to stand next to their easel while you and the other person sit down in a chair in front of them. Ask the person now sitting next to you to read out the other person's strengths one at a time from their notebook. As they do this, the person standing will write these down in the empty center column of their sheet. Remember, each piece of feedback should be accompanied with at least one specific example. The person receiving the feedback can ask clarifying questions, but cannot disagree with the information being provided. It's critical that the person providing the feedback be able to give an example or two of each strength as they are reading them out. The facilitator is also expected to add their own examples as needed to the growing list of behavioural strengths. When we are in conflict, adversaries rarely focus on each other's strengths, so this can be somewhat uncomfortable as well as enlightening. The next stage is to ask the person to unfold their left column and reveal their assessment of their own strengths. They present their 8 items, one by one, again giving examples of each. Then they unfold their right column to reveal what they thought the other person, their adversary, would say. Suddenly there's a lot of information. The facilitator should explore agreements and discrepancies and encourage a good discussion about them. Try to limit any talk about overusing strengths at this point, as this will be discussed later when areas of development are explored. The goal here is just to have the two people recognise that there's more to the situation than a trail of negatives by first building a full picture of each other's strengths. It is usually remarkable how much agreement there is between the strengths recognised by the individual and those from the individual providing the feedback. There can be some differences when it comes to what the receiver thinks the other will say, because the conflict itself can influence how the person thinks they are seen by the other. The process so far will have taken more than an hour to complete, so after a 10-minute break, the second person stands before their easel and the same process occurs, focusing first on the feedback from the other person, then comparing that with the individual's view of their own strengths, and finally looking together at what the second individual thought would be said. The analysis of similarities and differences often leads to laughter and surprise, which can greatly lighten the mood between the two adversaries. Step 4, the development. Now ask the two people to return to their easels. Once there, they divide a second sheet of flip chart paper into 3 columns, this time focusing on areas for development. The left column will contain what the individual believes are the 6 areas of development needed for them to become a more effective leader, colleague, or team member. The right column will reflect what they believe the other individual will identify as their 6 areas of needed development. And finally, they should write in their notebooks the development areas they see for the other person. Once they are finished, repeat the process of having each one stand next to their easel while you and the other person sit in front of them. The person sitting next to you reads out the other person's areas for development one at a time from their notebook. The person standing will write these down in the centre column of their sheet. Go through the whole sharing process once again with both people. At the end, explore both the agreements and the discrepancies and encourage a good discussion about them. As mentioned previously, often problems between two people are generated by one individual overusing their strengths. For example, an assertive person can become aggressive, even tyrannical, and because people don't want to take them on, over time this behaviour is reinforced and becomes negative. Most of us have overused strengths in our repertoires. It is for the facilitator to help provide understanding of this important concept. Here's another top tip. Sometimes the person receiving the feedback will become defensive and maybe even argumentative. You can stop this by asking them to hold on to their opinions until you've seen all the items from both sides. It is your job as facilitator to act as the referee and not allow disagreement, because feedback is simply neutral information to be considered. Step 5, the so what. Now that the analysis steps have been completed, the facilitator should work with the conflicting parties to generate some specific strategies for change. The root of the conflict will often be in the most offending behaviours identified in these 8 and 6 assessments, and its resolution will be in how the two can support each other as allies, rather than adversaries, in their attempts to diminish these less than helpful behaviours. It is often the case that there is considerable agreement between the two parties in relation to these areas of development. It helps if the boss will actively accept the solutions and help both people live with the agreements made. To this end, sometimes we bring the boss of the two people in to participate in the analysis and add their views. This works well if you need the boss to hold people accountable for the details of the changes. But beware, this could make it very hard to get to the core of the conflict, especially if the boss is biased. People are generally truthful in the first round of feedback, the strengths, because there's little conflict in doing so. There is often considerable similarity and agreement between them, which is both surprising to the two adversaries and gratifying to the facilitator. Our process leads individuals to be more candid about their own limitations for the second round, the development areas, because people do not want to be seen as lacking in courage about owning their weaknesses. The result is, when each looks at the other's information, there are many areas of agreement. For example, if one person sees himself as sometimes being aggressive, he will likely find that the other person agrees. There is agreement on the problem, the aggression, and that leads to the possibility of a mutual solution being developed. This process also forces the behaviours identified as areas for development to be really specific, and this means that the potential solutions will also be specific. More often than not, the former adversaries decide together how to help each other be more effective, because both realise that their own success is being blocked by the behaviours they together identified and agreed on. Accountability to each other, and possibly their boss, makes the changes real. The boss also has the authority to suggest that they expect positive changes to occur because the current situation is not acceptable. As part of their agreed strategy, get the two participants to meet regularly to discuss their progress. The facilitator can also continue meeting with them and support their commitment to change. It is also possible for each participant to take an area of development and, with the help of their partner, undertake a 6-step problem-solving design, helping their partner in their analysis and eventual strategies. Here's a summary of the steps with the timing for each. Step 1, the setup. Step 2, the information gathering. Step 3, the strength sharing. Step 4, the development. Step 5, the so what. The total design takes 3 hours.